good morning, good morning. Sorry about that silly remind message, class beginning at 9 a.m. What I really meant is class at 10 a.m. I am king of the typo and I make those mistakes all the time. How's everybody doing today? I see that we have three people in our virtual audience right now. If you're on the chat, go ahead and type hello into the chat bar and let me know you're sitting there. Got myself a cup of coffee, some water in case I get thirsty. And I'm ready today to talk about that thing that is killing us all. Stress, stress, stress. How many of you are stressed out at the particular moment? How many of you are experiencing stress right now? If you are, go ahead and type in the chat bar and tell me if you are. If you are living a stress-free life, I'd like to hear that too. Good morning, Johanna. Good to see you. Good morning, Eric. Good to see you. Thanks for coming today. So today, we are going to be talking about stress and its effects on our body. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight and the experience of stress that we have. And we're going to talk about how we can maybe learn to, next week, we're going to talk about how maybe we can deal with these stress feelings so that we can have happier, healthier lives. I see we have Matthew Moreta in the audience. Good to see you, Matt. Thanks for coming. Great audience today. Let's go ahead and get started. If you are stressed out right now, go ahead and let me know in the chat bar. Meanwhile, I'm going to go ahead and get started with this lecture. So we're going to talk a little bit about the experience of stress in everyday life. We're going to talk about the complex types of stressors that we have. And we're going to talk about how stress affects you physically and the impact that it might have on your health. Have you folks ever heard stress kills? You know what? It does. And hopefully, after this lecture, you'll be able to understand a little bit more why it does. Okay? So, stress. Stress is any circumstance that scares you to respond to some sort of change in your environment. It's any circumstance that threatens or that you perceive as threatening your well-being and thereby tax your coping abilities. Stress is complex. Actually, you know what I'm going to say? Stress doesn't even really have to be that complex. It doesn't have to be a threat. You know what? If you were walking and somebody steps in front of you and you have to walk around them because they're in your way, if somebody bumps into you, then that typically is a stressor. So stressors go from very big, like having the rent due and you don't have the money, or getting in a car accident. And they can be as simple as somebody telling you you have to get up and move your books to a different table because they're trying to have a meeting. Stress is a very, very complex subject. Now, stress is very common everyday event. Major problems, like I said, from your car breaking down to something as simple as having to get up and move to a different table because somebody needs the table you're sitting at. All of these things represent stressors, if you will. And stressors represent from these major life events, like I said, having an illness, all the way to these things we call daily hassles. How many of you hate the drive to work? How many of you have a commute to work every day that annoys you? How many of you go to a job every day and there's a coworker that annoys the heck out of you? Do any of you have that kind of experience? These daily hassles represent stressors. And the crazy thing is, stressors add up on one another and create sort of a cumulative or additive event. So maybe the traffic's not bad. Maybe your coworker's not bad. Maybe the fact that you have a test due tonight is not bad. But when you start to combine all of these stressful things together, then we start to experience we have the experience of stress. Hello, how you doing? Okay, there are three basic types of stressors. You can think of acute stressors, you can think of chronic stressors, And you can think of anticipatory stressors. Okay. Now, how many of you have ever had a car break down, right? Or gotten fired from a job? That's what we would call an acute stressor. It's a threatening event and it has a relatively short duration, but then it goes away. That's what we would call an acute stressor. Probably more common for you is what we might call chronic stressors, which are threatening events that happen every day. Every day you go to work, you got to see Tina and she annoys the hell out of you. Or every day you've got to fight that 40 traffic trying to get to work. Those are what we would call chronic stressors. Now, being a teacher, I hear from students a lot and I always hear about anticipatory stressors. Students often send me emails saying, I'm freaking out about this test. This test is coming up and I can't, and I know I'm going to fail it. Or there's no way I'm going to be able to write this paper. This is what we would call an anticipatory stressor, which is the stress we feel from an event that hasn't even happened yet, right? It's not the car wreck or the car breaking down that screwed our life up. It's not the fact that Tina is nagging at us again and we don't like it, but it's actually an event that hasn't even happened yet can cause us to experience the feeling of stress and anticipatory stressors. And sometimes people get frustrated when they're having trouble achieving a goal. They may get frustrated, and that often causes people to experience a stress. I applied for a job up in the mountains. I really, really want to move to the Asheville Mountains. And I had a job interview for a job in the mountains. And when I did not get that job, I was extremely aroused and angry and stressed out for a couple of days as I dealt with the feelings of frustration from not getting that job. And you know what? Have any of you ever had the experience of having two things, sort of an internal conflict? I want to break up with my boyfriend, but I like my boyfriend. I have this internal conflict that's driving me one way or another. That's a form of stress as well. Now, and in fact, when we talk about internal conflicts, we can talk about the approach, avoidance, or approach avoidance. Sometimes you have to make a choice. Do I want to date Ted or do I want to date Alvin? Do I want to go to Carolina or do I want to go to NC State? Sometimes we have to do two things we really don't want. And you're like, man, I've got two bad choices. I can either choose to do this or I can choose to do that. Neither one of them is going to make me happy, right? And sometimes you're not sure if you want to go towards one thing versus another, the approach avoidance goal. Now, stressful, and here's the crazy thing, stressful events don't always have to be negative. Sometimes good things that happen to you are also stressful as well. How many of you have ever planned a wedding? Any of you ever planned a wedding or gotten married? The crazy thing is, a wedding is an incredibly positive event, but it's so stressful when you have to plan a wedding. And by the time you get married, you're like, man, I am so glad this is over. How many of you have a child? Do you remember how excited you were when the baby was getting ready to be born? But it's an incredibly stressful time. I'm really happy about the baby, but it's freaking me out because there's so many new things that are going to happen. And so sometimes we have life changes that are stressful. Even though they're positive, they may make us stressed out, right? Now, and then some of us are under pressure to perform. How many of you are under pressure by your parents to make A's or B's here at school? How many of you are in a job where you're under deadlines and you've got to have something done by the end of the week? This is pressure, which is another kind of stress that we feel. And these are the expectations or demands that people put on us for our behavior, right? And so sometimes we have the pressure to perform, that paper is due by Friday. The new business proposal is due by Tuesday. You have to make A's. You have to get into this school, right? This is pressure to perform. And then sometimes we feel the pressure to do what people like, right? My dad really wants me to to take this class, but I really don't want to take this class. But my dad is making me do this. So there's the pressure to conform. So the crazy thing is, pressure can come from all different situations. Uh, uh, Acute events that cause your blood pressure to raise quickly, or it can be chronic things that occur to you each and every day. It can be living in a world that is loud or noisy or busy. It can come from frustration, failing. It can come from competing desires, the desire to do A or B. Or, you know what? People can put pressure on you to perform well. And so, all of these different kinds of events can create the feelings of stress that we have. And I know you folks have probably experienced all of these different types of stressors at one time. Each and every one of these events is a stressor. The stress to perform, the stress of being frustrated, the stress of your car breaking down, the stress associated with having a baby. Each and every one of these things creates the experience of stress on you, right? Now, here's the bummer of it. Sometimes being stressed out is a good thing for your performance, but sometimes stress can keep you from performing well. How many of you have ever bombed an exam because you were freaked out about doing well on the exam? If you were, then you experienced too much arousal overload and it caused you to be too aroused for your performance. There's actually, if you look at this graph over here on the side, researchers have actually demonstrated the effect that arousal has on performance. Sometimes arousal is good. If you're doing something really, really simple, the more pumped up you are, the better you'll perform on that task. But if you're doing something really, really difficult, like taking a test or doing brain surgery or something, too much arousal can cause you to screw up that activity. And so the inverted U hypothesis shows us that stress is sometimes good for us and sometimes it can impair our performance. So strong emotions may hamper or enhance our ability to cope with stress and to perform. Okay, so for low complexity tasks, it's good to be really stressed out. So if you're running a race, being pumped up before that race is going to make you run a little bit faster. If you're doing brain surgery, being really, really pumped up is going to make you a little jittery and you won't perform that complex task very well. Okay, now, what exactly goes on in your body when you're stressed out? Okay, now, you have this. I don't know if you've ever heard of the term fight or flight response. But what that refers to is a set of physiological changes that occur in your body whenever you are aroused. Now, don't think of the fight or flight response as always being abject terror when the scariest thing ever happens. When something even small happens, right? It causes you to have the fight or flight response. So when Tina nags you again at work and and you get just a little bit frustrated, you're having a fight or flight response. When you think about that paper that you're having to write that's due this weekend and it makes you a little bit nervous to think about that paper, your body is experiencing the fight or flight response. The fight or flight response is a physiological reaction to some sort of stressor in your environment that typically mobilizes you for action, for either fighting or fleeing. Now, it occurs in what's called a part of your body we'll call the autonomic nervous system. So your brain controls all of your organs. You're not really aware of it, but your brain is causing your heart to beat right now. Your brain controls your stomach so that it can digest food. Your brain controls your lungs and keeps your lungs working. Your brain actually controls whether or not you are sweating or not. Your brain actually controls your adrenal glands and causes you to secrete adrenaline or not secrete adrenaline. So your brain is controlling all of your internal organs, but you are not aware of it. This is what we call your autonomic nervous system, the part of your nervous system that controls your organism, your organs. Now, you actually have two sets of nerves. One set of nerves make these organs change in a certain way whenever you're stressed out. We'll call these the sympathetic nerves. So whenever something stresses you out or scares you, your eyeballs dilate, you get goosebumps, your mouth gets dry, your palms get sweaty, you start hyperventilating, your heart rate starts beating, your blood pressure goes up, and your body dumps adrenaline into your system. This is what's called a sympathetic nervous response, and it happens anytime you are threatened by something. Now, on the other hand, you have another set of nerves that does the exact opposite of this whenever that threat passes you. All right. So if you were to see a bear and a bear was going to chase you, you'd have a sympathetic nervous response. And all of these things on the left side of this graph would happen. But as soon as you escape that bear, you would then have a parasympathetic nervous response. And the other set of nerves would cause the activities on the right side of the screen to happen. And so, in a sense, your brain mobilizes your organs to help you defend yourself against threats. And this mobilization of these organs is known as the fight or flight response. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Right? And so your brain mobilizes you to defend yourself in times of threat. Now, here's the deal. Actually, before I go on, here's the deal. The sympathetic nervous response is really good in the short term. It allows you to fight or to run or to defend yourself from the bear. And if you get injured, it actually helps your body not go into shock, and it protects your body from damage that you might experience when this event occurs. The only thing is, this system was not designed to deal with long-term threats. So in the modern world, we get stressed from events that won't go away. Imagine if the bear lived in your living room and was always there. Your body would always be in a sympathetic state, and these effects that occur in your body that are good in the short term are bad in the long term. Okay? Now, here's the crazy thing. Not everybody feels stress from the same event. The difference actually depends upon how you appraise the event. What is stressful to me might not be stressful to you, Caleb, might not be stressful to you, Matthew. What is stressful to Johanna might not be stressful to me. So it depends on how you feel about the event. For the most part, we all see something and we know that it's a threat. You'll call that the primary appraisal or the initial evaluation of the threat. And then what determines whether or not you really experience the sympathetic nervous response is your secondary appraisal. You decide to yourself, do I have the ability to deal with that threat? And we're actually going to talk about this two-step appraisal model in more detail when we get to the stress part of our class. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this model, but these are the appraisals that help us decide, help our body decide if we're really going to experience that threat. So think about it. If you see the bear, bears are scary and you know that they're a threat, but the bear is 700 yards away and you know that you can easily get away from the bear by getting in your car and driving away, you're not going to experience stress. On the other hand, if the bear is right there 15 feet away from you and there's nowhere to run or hide, you may experience have the experience of stress. So it depends upon two appraisals. Is there a threat in my environment? And is that threat something that I can or cannot deal with? Now, here's the physiological response to stress. Okay, so here's the deal. we have two brain-body pathways that control our physiological response to stress. And this picture over here kind of gives you a demonstration of this. And the first pathway is routed through the autonomic nervous system. And it involves the action of the adrenal glands that release hormones, stress hormones that mobilize the body for action. And the second part of is that goes from the brain to the endocrine system that involves the pituitary gland, which stimulates our adrenal glands to release other corticosteroids to increase our energy. Both of these pathways are activated by this structure in our brain called the hypothalamus. So you have this little structure in your brain called the amygdala, and that's your fear center. And whenever it's activated by something you see that scares you, your amygdala talks to your hypothalamus, and it causes your hypothalamus to become activated. And the hypothalamus causes that physiological response that I talked about earlier, with your heart beating and your eyes getting bigger and hyperventilating. So your hypothalamus causes that to happen. And then your hypothalamus also activates your pituitary gland, which releases stress hormones in your body. And what these do is they cause your organs to change their function, but it also causes hormones and adrenaline to be released throughout your body. Okay, now here's the deal. The stress hormone cortisol is really, really good in the short term. Okay, and in fact, if we go back, what these hormones do is they increase the level of fat in your blood, which is energy to fight, and it increases this cortisol, which causes you to become aroused and actually decreases your immune response so that you don't get all puffy. Let's say you get scratched or hurt. If you swell, you won't be able to use that body part. So what this hormone does is it decreases your immune response so you don't swell up the moment you get attacked. And so you get extra energy and your body prepares itself to be injured. So this is sort of the hormonal changes that occur in your body. As I suggested, these hormonal changes are very, very, very useful in the short term, because if you see the bear coming, you need extra energy to run away. If you actually have to fight that bear and it injures you, you don't want your body to swell up so that you can't fight that bear, right? So these are very, very good in the short term. The only problem is these hormones that are good in the short term are actually very, very bad in the long term. What you're looking at here, right here, is a model that was created by a fellow named, that was described by a fellow named Hans Seeley to describe the effect that long-term stress has on our health and well-being. And this is a model of the body's response to stress, specifically of chronic stress. Okay, and it's really in three stages. So you notice that we have this resistance to stress, and actually on the left side, I would disagree with the chart that they have in the book. I would actually think of it on the left, on the y-axis, as your immune functioning, your resistance to threats, to disease, your ability to stay healthy. All right. Now, here's the deal. Whenever we are stressed out by something, our body goes through an alarm stage, which is our initial response to threat. We get that fight or flight response, and as I suggested to you, our immune response actually dips down a little bit. And you'll notice that right here as our body prepares ourselves to fight and flight, right? But over time, our body then changes and creates what we would call a resistance stage, where these physiological changes, we begin coping with the stressor, and our immune response actually rises so that we can protect ourselves from things that might make us sick or kill us, right? But the problem with stress is that if it goes on long enough, this immune response that is heightened, that protects us, wears out. it gets tired and it can't defend itself anymore. And we then go into what's known as an exhaustion stage. So if you're stressed for too long, your body's resources are depleted, leading to physical exhaustion, decreased immune functioning, and susceptibility to illness. And so, if you're stressed out long enough, these fat that is good for your body in the short term builds up in your arteries and can cause heart disease, right? If you have this cortisol in your system long enough, it causes your heart rate to rise and your blood pressure to rise to fight off the effects. But if your blood pressure is high for too long, that can make you sick. And this immune response that protects you from illness, that protects you from bacteria and viruses that can make you sick, while it protects you for a while, if it's activated too long, this system that provides this immune response will go down and you will be more susceptible to sickness. So people who are stressed out for too long, they start to their blood pressure gets too high for too long. They build up fats in their blood system and they start to develop coronary disease. And this is why stress can lead to a heart attack. People who are stressed out too long, their immune functioning decreases and they become more susceptible to colds, to flus. And this is why people even suggest that stress can be related to cancer, because your immune response is responsible to a certain degree from protecting you from the abnormal metabolism of cells that leads to cancer. So stress is actually implicated in heart disease and colds and flus and even in cancer. And it's because this autonomic nervous system response, which is really good for short threats, creates changes in your body that are actually damaging to your body over the long term, right? And modern day is full of long term chronic stressors, right? So every day you wake up and something causes your blood pressure to rise. And so long term, your body breaks down because of this stress. Psychosomatic diseases are genuine physical ailments thought to be caused in part by stress and other psychological factors, especially emotional distress. And like I said, if you look at these things over here that I'm describing, we got high blood pressure, ulcers, asthma, eczema. How many of you have lots of tension headaches or have lots of headaches? Stress suppresses the functioning of the immune response, and stress can even interfere with neurogenesis and can affect your memories and your brain functioning. Stress can be actually quite dangerous. Okay, now that's all I wanted to talk about today. I just wanted to introduce you to the physiological effects of stress. Remember that stress comes in all different shapes and types. It can be chronic, long term, it can be short. It can occur because of pressure that people put on you. Stress can even occur because good things are happening to you. Stress can happen when we fail or when we're frustrated about our life and things are not going wrong. And stress can occur because of all these different modern day experiences that we feel. Stress is related to our autonomic functioning, and it causes us to experience this biological change in our body called the fight or flight response. And the fight or flight response is controlled by our hypothalamus and our pituitary gland, and it causes these physiological changes in our body: increased fat in our blood, increased cortisol in our system, and increased functioning of our in speeding up our heart and our body. And stress is really good in the short term because it allows us to get away from the threat. But if that stress won't go away, these physiological changes actually affect our body's ability to fight off the things that make us sick. And These physiological changes often can clog up our circulatory system and give us heart disease, or they can impair our immune functioning and cause us to be more likely to experience uh, to experience heart attack, all right, or cancer, or to have cancer. So here's what we're going to do in lab tonight. When you get to class, we're actually going to talk about those kinds of things that give us stress. We're going to find out what kinds of stress do you experience. Are you experiencing low levels of chronic stress? Do you have an acute stressor in your life? Are you frustrated? Do you experience ambient stress because you live in a crowded or noisy place? We're going to talk about all these different kinds of stress and find out what's affecting us as a group of students. And I even have a questionnaire we're going to take to see if you are at an increased risk for suffering a psychosomatic illness. So that's all I have to say today. Have a great day. I look forward to seeing you tonight in the webinar at 8 o'clock. Take care and have a great and stress-free day. Bye.